Hi, everybody. Charles Hoskinson here. I figured I'd go ahead and do another impromptu AMA. I'm in warm, sunny Colorado right now. No snow on the ground. Actually, some decent light, so things are looking pretty good here. And I got my Hawaiian shirt on because it's not too hot or cold. Anyway, nice to have everybody here, and I suspect that more people will come in as I talk. And I love doing AMAs, and you guys love listening to AMAs, so hopefully we'll have some fun. All right. So first, a few announcements, a few things. First off, 1.4 is coming along well. We're in regression testing right now. We've had a few regressions, but nothing significant found. It's a lot of new code, a huge amount of refactoring on the core, new database solutions. So we've gone from lots of storage to little storage. Much more efficient, some improvements on the network side, but the biggest is the wallet backend. It's the first piece of formally verified code we have, and we're having a lot of fun integrating that. So code is, we're feature frozen. The dev cutoff was a few weeks ago, and we're just going ahead and working our way through QA, and that's led by Alan McNichols and his team. He's the head of the QA department at IOHK. So not much longer. I'd say a few more weeks, and hopefully we should have end of November or early December release for 1.4. So it's the most significant update we've ever made to the Cardano ecosystem. And then after that, every update is going to be Shelley related. So the first major update will be basically some new code for Ouroboros BFT, and that'll get us all lined up so that we can start moving towards some variant of Ouroboros, either Prouse or Genesis, or something along those lines. We've been doing a lot of test implementations of Ouroboros BFT. We've actually have 5 different teams that are using it in various capacities, and we've learned a lot about that particular protocol. And we recently published the paper on ePrint for Ouroboros BFT, so look for that. And then after BFT comes out, we have a whole new network stack we've designed, and it's a really cool piece of engineering. You can either build them bottom up or you can build them top down. We chose a top down approach for it, and we've come up with all kinds of cool, interesting, novel solutions to various problems that are endemic in the entire network world of the cryptocurrency space, and some that are specific that we have to overcome for Cardano, given the nature of Ouroboros. It's a completely new protocol. But overall, things are looking pretty good there. VRF implementation and test KES implementation is done for Ouroboros. So we have a pretty good understanding of what those parts of the protocol look like in terms of key evolving signatures. We're also looking into XMSS at the moment, and we should have some early parameterizations for that, depending upon Peter Schwab's work. So the good news is we're likely going to be quantum resistant, in addition to having all these newfangled features for Cardano. So the rewrite's coming along well. Just a little caveat, if you're following the main repository, you might want to look into the IOHK GitHub repo, because there's several repos like Cardano Chain and so forth, which are separate from the main Cardano SL repo. And we're making all of the contributions there for the core rewrite that's coming for Shelley. So you're going to see a slowdown in code in Cardano SL because the people who are working on that main repo are now working on other repos. So if you're watching just one repo, you might think that we're slowing down development, but the reality is we're just moving to a different area of GitHub. So make sure you follow those repos as well, so you can see that weekly progress. Yoroi was recently just open source, so congratulations to Emergo. And we're pretty excited to hear about Ledger support, and pretty excited to hear about Trezor support. Trezor just updated their side, so if you have a Trezor, very soon Yoroi will support that. And if you have a Ledger device, very soon Yoroi will support that as well. On our end, we're rewriting the wallet backend for Cardano so that it's modular and it can be pulled out and can connect to our Rust code and also can connect to our Haskell code. Once that's done, the very next thing we're going to do is migrate from the old address style to the new Icarus address style. And once that migration is done, then we should be easily able to have Ledger support for our system. In addition to that, then we'll start allowing you to do some things like what you can do with the Rust client, like manual transaction creation. There's some videos showing that as a demo that Lars did, and then choosing your own UTXO and some other things that exchanges have requested. So over the coming few months, a lot of this stuff is going to roll out. I believe Yoroi is also prioritizing multi-sig, so that's going to come soon. I was in Switzerland recently, and I picked up some of these. I had a great chance to go talk to the guys at Tangem. Now, these are pretty cool. So these are actually full Bitcoin and Ethereum wallets, and those little chips right there are actually NFC trusted hardware modules. And basically, to use them, it's really nifty. I'll show you guys. Okay, so here's my phone, and you can just see the screen and everything like that. Okay, cool. Now, what you do is you just tap the back, and it'll actually bring up the app. There you go, and you can just spend straight from that. So this is actually a full wallet, and they only cost like $1 to make. So we're negotiating with the company right now to build something like that for Cardano, and it'll have a nifty ADA wallet. And actually, our hope is to have them as a 2-pack. So because they cost so little to make, what we'd like to do is have a 1 of 2 multi-sig, where you have one for a recovery, and then the other one is a spending wallet. And the spending wallet also has a PIN code that you can program in. So when you want to spend, you have to enter the PIN code. And if you ever lose your spending wallet, you can go to your recovery variant and just drain the wallet to a safe place. So we're in discussions about our different options and what we can do there. But our hope is that we can get support for Tangem pretty soon. And it shouldn't cost very much money to buy these, like a few dollars per unit. And there's all kinds of cool things we can do. And once we get in the hardware space, it'll be fun to see where we go with that. So that's underway. Let's see if there's anything else significant. Overall, just a lot of code is being written. Rust team is expanding. We just hired a new person for it, and more people are on the way. And we have a lot of code that's coming out pretty much on a daily basis. We also just opened up a repo that has a lot of multi-party computation code that team's been writing for quite a while. And that MPC code is for the Kaleidoscope research line that Bernardo David, Mario Larangera, and Rafael Dowsey created. So if you're interested in seeing MPC applied to gaming and gambling, that's a really good repo as a reference point. And it'd be super cool to see if somebody could take that code base and then connect that code in some way to Yella. So either we'll try to do that, or we'll see if we can get a third party to go around that way. But we think that's going to be a lot of fun. In terms of travel, I'm going to Mexico soon, next week. I'm skipping Thanksgiving here, and I'm going to, I guess, have some turkey down in Monterrey for a wonderful cryptocurrency conference down there. I'll be the keynote. And then after that, I'm going to Thailand, straight from Mexico for Beyond Blocks. Coming home for a little bit. Then I'll be in Vegas. I'll be in Scotland for Plutus Fest. And then from Plutus Fest, I'm going to, I think, Abu Dhabi. And then after that, I'm going down to Uganda, where we're going to have a lot of cool announcements about various things we're doing in Uganda, and that'll be in December. So look for those. But our Pan-African strategy is really coming together, and it's pretty amazing to see how fast things have been growing. In terms of Plutus Fest, that's going to be really cool. The Plutus team has been working for about 1.5 years on Plutus. We've gone through 16 revisions of the language, and they've really done some amazing things there. And Plutus Fest is the first opportunity to kind of show this off to the world. And we're working real hard to make it easy for people to write test Plutus contracts. We have this concept called a mock chain. And basically the mock chain is like a fake blockchain. So you can write all these Plutus contracts and you can deploy them on the mock chain and run them. And it's an operating environment that's kind of like what you would expect when the Plutus gets integrated into Cardano. So Plutus Fest will be really the first time we open that up and do tutorials, and our hope is to probably have a hackathon or something like that, along with a few tutorial sessions. There are going to be 2 tracks with Plutus Fest. One track is going to be for PL experts, and we're inviting all the people from Glasgow and St. Andrews and that whole area to come on over and talk about the nuts and bolts of how the language is designed. That's mostly meant for the PhDs and people who care about that stuff. And then the other track is going to be for developers, people who are interested in writing Plutus smart contracts, and people are interested in this extended UTXO model, as well as how does Haskell, Plutus, and Marlowe, how do they all fit together, and what does that development experience look like? So the entire Plutus team will be there. Michael Peyton-Jones, Simon Thompson's going to be there. Phil Wadler is going to be there. Duncan Coutts is going to be there. I'll be there. So we're going to have a lot of people. And you'll have a firsthand chance to meet them, talk to them. We're going to be giving away free T-shirts, some mugs with the Plutus logo, and some other surprises. We're also going to try to get the operational semantics of Plutus on a napkin, because back in January of this year in Portugal, we mused aloud if it was possible to get the semantics so simple that they could be on a dinner napkin. So hopefully we can print them on a paper napkin, and we'll see if we can get that done by December. So that'll be a lot of fun. Anyway, so that's the most recent event. Some of you are aware we also had a great piece of news with the Cardano Foundation, where Parsons resigned, and now Pascal is in the effort of cleaning things up. I made a statement about that, but the good news is now that we're moving in the right direction there. Hopefully we can wake up the foundation and get it into where it was supposed to go in terms of community management, in terms of funding the community. So we had this concept that we proposed to the foundation about a year ago, this notion of a Cardano hub. And basically the idea would be that a community group comes together and says, we love Cardano so much that we'd like to work full time on evangelizing and growing the ecosystem, creating meetup groups, doing podcasts, and whatever else is necessary to spread the good word and get people excited about that. Hopefully we'll be able to resurrect that and see some of these hubs evolve in various jurisdictions throughout Africa, throughout Southeast Asia, United States, and other places. The Cardano Effect Podcast just got launched. We were trying to get out in November, and I'm super excited that they were actually able to do it. Kudos to Philip and Sebastian and Rick. They really worked hard on getting that pulled together. And, it's got a beautiful logo, and the format's quite nice. And I'd highly encourage everybody to go and watch it. And I'd highly encourage everybody to give some advice and suggestions about what they'd like to see or improvements to the format. It's really a pilot, and it's only as good as what people put in. So I'd love for people to invest a little bit more time and effort and propagate that, and hopefully we can make that show successful. The format is basically 2 episodes a week. One episode is topical, and one episode is an interview episode. So the interview episodes will be populated initially by Emergo and IOHK people just to get the ball rolling. But then the hope is for anyone in the ecosystem who's really interesting and has a cool project, something they're doing, to come on and talk. And so there's a lot of great formats for that, like epicenter and triangulation and so forth. And my hope is that they'll be able to emulate that in some sort of way. So Cardano Effect is out, pretty cool. And we're definitely going to have a lot of interesting, nice things to broadcast in the next, I'd say 45 days, 60 days on the community management side, now that ball's rolling again. Okay, so those are all the updates. Let's go ahead and get to the questions. I haven't been looking at the questions at all, so. This is from Adrian Ball. Hi, Charles. Good to see you. I appreciate Cardano's open source, but do you take notice of others concentrating on global patents, i.e. right? And there's also Algorand and Hashgraph and these guys. And also, what does open source mean? So there's a difference between free software and open source. So free software is this concept of saying, hey, it's under an open license, and you guys can take it, fork it, do what you want with it. But really, the development model around that is mostly centralized, meaning there's a curating company. They have their own roadmap. They're doing their own things, and they're making those decisions. I would argue things like the Java virtual machine, like what Oracle is doing in that environment, it looks a lot like free software in that respect. So it's technically under an open source license, but at the end of the day, there's a closed group of people that it's kind of invitation only, who have a lot of control over what 1.9, 2.0, and so forth look like. Then when you talk about an open source project, that's more like Hyperledger Fabric or Bitcoin. And these projects are saying, hey, there is no leader, there is no custodial company that runs everything, there's no beneficent dictator for life. And really, there's some sort of open community governance process or steering committee, which is composed of a federation or hopefully a decentralized group of people. And basically, the idea there is that no one actor is so critical that if they were to disappear, the project would go away. The project would continue and subsist and find ways to grow and evolve. So our goal is to be an open source project with respect to Cardano, and we'd like to see that move in that direction. So we hired a wonderful open source project manager. His name is Robin, and Robin is going to help steer us in that direction. So we've started taking all the steps necessary to really be an open project in that respect. We're moving from UTrack to GitHub and trying to put all of our issue tracking and other things there instead of having it in closed systems. We're also going to start writing a series of blog posts explaining what is the difference between open source and then how historically are open source projects well governed. There are a lot of books and reading materials on this as well, and Robin's going to create a reading list for us internally, but then we'll also share that reading list with everybody in the community. And then we'll just start opening it up and start creating a nice dialogue with everybody. In addition to that, we're also looking into writing a Cardano improvement proposal process. Every cryptocurrency that's legitimate needs one. We're no different. So as we get closer to Shelley, all future updates post Shelley hopefully will be constrained by CIP process. So we'll take everything we want to do, put it into a CIP, and just list it in GitHub. And so major releases will be basically in that format. It takes a lot of work to do that, slows things down quite a bit. So it's why we decided to skip that process for Shelley, because the key driver here is getting Shelley to market as quickly as we can. But moving beyond Shelley, that's going to be a big goal. Now, the advantage we have also is we can put a voting system to CIPs and a funding system to CIPs. So there's going to be a treasury component and a liquid democratic component for democratic consent of CIPs. So we've written one paper on that, and we have some videos on our YouTube page about that, and I highly encourage people to look into it. But we're definitely going to continue that research thread, and we're definitely going to continue heavy investments to get us to the next level of basically getting a functional treasury model in Cardano and getting a functional CIP process into Cardano with a voting system connected to it. Now, as with all things, you have to be really careful when you're talking about democracy, because you can get it wrong to comical effects. So it'll be a systematic and gradual process. But the good news is we're not in this alone. There's about 10 years of history in the cryptocurrency space, and there's a lot of projects that focus a lot on governance, from Dash to Tezos, and there's good models to learn from. And my belief is that this ought not be a USP. This ought to be a best practice, like the Bitcoin improvement proposal, the Ethereum improvement proposal. So we'll get there. Okay. All right, let's see the next question here. Tupac. Mexico City, let's see here. Has IOHK Emergo or CF employed or hired anyone from Africa who can assist in regulation planning? Our Director of African Operations is John O'Connor, and we have engaged a lot with regulators, and we've talked to a lot of people who are domain experts like Chris Cleverly and so forth in various jurisdictions like Uganda. So the short answer is we don't have a dedicated lawyer who runs around, but the longer answer is we do actually have infrastructure and thought leaders in Africa, and we're going to have a lot of opportunity to do some cool things there. All right. When will ETC have that little wallet? I wish I knew. I mean, it technically wouldn't be hard at all for them to support ETC. It's just there hasn't been any demand, and you have to make a deal with them. So that's the advantage of having a treasury system, is that the manufacturer themselves can say, hey, if you want us to support it, pay us, and submit a ballot, and then the community can decide, instead of the people coming down from the ivory tower. Okay, what else we have here? Yeah, IronX. So I don't know much about this IronX deal or what Emergo Hong Kong has planned. Just on my side, we were never fully informed. We were aware that they had built some sort of relationship with this exchange, and I guess it's a pre-existing Forex exchange, but we'd never been in any of those conversations on the IOHK side, and we don't know too much about it. The reality is that it is important to have liquidity in many different jurisdictions in many different forms. That's a necessity for the ecosystem to grow and for infrastructure to grow around the ecosystem. You need good payment systems. You need debit cards. You need these crazy little hardware wallets. You need things like that for the ecosystem to flourish. And the bedrock of that is the exchange layer of the system. So I'm glad to hear that there's an increase in liquidity, but we tend at IOHK to stay out of those deals because they tend to be regulated and they tend to be very specific, and it would not be proper for us to get involved because it would be picking winners and losers. If we give some time and attention to one, well, why aren't we doing it for Binance or Bittrex or any of the others? So where we do get involved oftentimes is usually on the wallets side, where the exchange will integrate, and then they have technical questions about the APIs, or they're having an issue with the wallet and they send us some questions and we help them fix that or build some additional features for them. But we try not to get involved directly in the negotiations of what gets listed or not. We've had to sometimes because the foundation was responsible for that, and under Parsons' leadership, they decided not to do that at all. So for the good of the ecosystem, we had to get involved occasionally. But our hope is to stay out of those things, and that includes that particular deal. Okay. Yeah, the 2020 Olympics from Frey in Tokyo, they're really taking that seriously in Japan. I was in Japan not too long ago, and we were talking to some government officials, and every single one of them had the Olympic Tokyo 2020 pin on their suit lapels. So it's certainly a big pivotal moment for Japan. I think they're taking it as seriously as China did for the 2008 Olympics. And it'll be super cool for us to do something special. So my hope is that Cardano sufficiently evolved to that state where the Japanese community organically will go and do something. And it's a bit too far out for us to make any commitments today, but I'd love to see something interesting. It would be a nice coup for the treasury system if we could sponsor the 2020 Olympics just from Cardano itself, or maybe pull a Dogecoin and sponsor the bobsledding team or something like that and get some Jamaicans. That's a good question. Can you explain more about the longest chain in the consensus protocol is more dense than an attacker's chain? What law of nature prevents an attacker's chain from being more dense? The assumption that you've never had a 51% attack since Genesis. Assumptions matter. How many staking pools will Cardano have? Well, there is no hard limit or minimum, but we can tune the incentive system to try to encourage the system to converge to a particular number. So the current best thinking is we'd like to have about 1,000. So that basically what you do is we have some parameters in our incentives paper that we wrote out of Oxford. And if you tune them in just the right way, you make more money if you get closer to that, and you make less money if you deviate from that. So our hope is to have 1,000 stake pools, give or take. Our assumption is around 80% of the blocks will be made by stake pools and 20% will be made by private interests. Technically, you can go in any direction, but these things tend to normalize around more federation. It's really incredible, though, if we achieve that, because EOS has 21 and Bitcoin has a roughly 10-ish major pools that control things. So we'd be 100 times more decentralized in Bitcoin and about 50 times more decentralized in EOS, just on the stake pool level. But voting will be easier. All right, let's see what else we got here. What do I think about the BCH fork? Years ago, I heard about all the fray between Roger and the Bitcoin core devs, and it was really a shame that there couldn't have been a peaceful way of resolving the debate. I mean, it's perfectly legitimate, given the way that network stacks work, to have larger blocks. It could have had 2 megabyte blocks, even 10 megabyte blocks. There's a great piece of research by Christian Decker and Roger Wattenhofer back in 2013 that actually modeled propagation of blocks throughout the Bitcoin network. And the research concluded that you could have larger blocks and it wouldn't cause catastrophic damage to the system. So I'm not necessarily a big blocker, but I didn't really fully appreciate why this was such a humongous issue for certain people that believe they should be so small. But as a result, I kind of stayed out of it. But then it got so furious that it split into Bitcoin Cash and to Bitcoin. And what really bothered me was the existence of Craig Wright in Bitcoin Cash. I think the guy's a sociopath and a fraud. I saw him in Rwanda. It was one of the most distasteful situations I've ever had in my life. We were in the back room before we were sitting on a panel together, and the entire time we were in the panel pre-discussion, he was on his cell phone and only looking up to criticize someone. And then he goes and opens up his speech in Rwanda saying he has more money than everybody in the country. I don't know what kind of a human being thinks this way or approaches life this way or builds legitimacy by lying and saying he's Satoshi, but there's certainly some people who follow them. And the fact that they welcomed him into the Bitcoin Cash ecosystem with open arms, saying, hey, we have Satoshi, look how smart we are, and we have the best people. I think it was a huge mistake for that community. And now they're reaping what they sow. So I wish them well, and I hope things turn out better. But, there are just certain people in the world you don't do business with, and you try not to have in your community. Nothing about Brazil and Latin America. Oh, we have plenty of plans for Brazil and Latin America. We actually have a lot of Brazilian cryptographers. Right? In fact, the head of our enterprise group is Bruno Pelio. He's Brazilian. And we have Bernardo David, Mario Laranjeira. We love Brazil. We have an office down in Argentina. It's not too far away. It's in Buenos Aires. And the head of Emergo's, their CTO, is Chilean. So we do have Latin American roots. And there's certainly a lot of things we're doing on the development side. We just haven't gotten around to trying to build out big community management, pushing in that jurisdiction. That said, 2019, we will do that. I was going to go to a conference down in Chile. I just couldn't make the dates work with everything else. But I will be going to Mexico. And then moving further south, I'd love to go to Brazil in 2019. Wonderful country, lots of stuff going on, great cryptocurrency community. Same for Argentina. So we'll definitely push hard into Latin America. One way or another. It just needs things take time. And we have a phenomenal director of African operations, and Emergo is an Asian company. So it's a little easier for us to navigate in those jurisdictions than it is at the moment for us to navigate in Central America and South America. But, they're family too, and we'll get around to it. Plus, a lot of our research is done by Brazilians. And so they remind me on a weekly basis that we should do more, if anything, just for the food. Okay, what else we got here? From the Cardano effect, what do you think will be the major impact of open sourcing Yoroi? I have a very firm belief that all wallets, unless there's a very good technical reason, must be open source. If you are going to go to the community and say, put your money on this wallet, the community has the right to see the source code. If anything, just to verify you haven't put a backdoor in it to steal people's money, or you haven't biased it in some way where you can skim off the top. Okay, so that's just a standard, and it's a standard we've had since the very beginning. Satoshi didn't release some closed binaries of Bitcoin and say, trust me. The code was right out there, and people could see it and read it. And that's how cryptography is done, and that's how good wallets are done. So it's incredibly important for Yoroi to be open source, for people to see the source code, read the source code, fork the source code, and understand the source code, know what's happening with their money. So if anything, super important, glad to have that there. Second, the whole point of the Icarus project was to be a reference point for people to fork that code and build their own products, whether that product be what we've seen with Infinito, where they have now a mobile wallet, or that product be what we've seen with Yoroi. And so in a sense, that open source nature of that reference client is mission accomplished, and great things have been done. And if Yoroi is to be truly open source, our hope is people will fork that and create their own wallets or their own experiences, especially as the functionality tends to increase. And that's only a net positive for the entire ecosystem. So at the moment, it's a small step. At the moment, it probably won't appreciably see any returns, but it's like a vector. If the earlier you are, it doesn't matter what the angle is, the further and further apart they get, right, as you go further along. So that's exactly what will happen year 2, year 3, year 4, and eventually we'll have a vibrant ecosystem because of these open source projects. So good stuff. Could you please give us some, lost that, hang on a second. It's a web development question. Can you please give some example of what web developer can do with Cardano, please? Really hard to imagine without first successful projects. What kind of project could we do? So when you're a web developer, you're thinking about experiences for your user, okay? And those experiences are domain specific. So it can be, I want to build a CRM system, or I want to build a text editor, or I want to build a PGP client that's built into the browser like Mailvelope. And every single one of these has an intended user and use case behind it. The point of smart contracts and cryptocurrencies isn't about saying we're going to go in and invent new experiences or go in and invent new applications for your users. So it's never been about that. Your creativity is your creativity, solve their problems. The point is that there are components to your user experience, whatever that might be, that maybe are compromised or more difficult or in some way are too trusted when you're talking about a legacy system. For example, if you're WikiLeaks, you have to use a legacy payment provider. Well, what happens when those people shut you out? Or it's the same deal if you're doing podcasts and you're building a great experience, but you're a bit too controversial. Maybe you're Sargon, or maybe you're Jordan Peterson, and suddenly you've been deplatformed. So in the legacy world, even though you have this great experience and you've built these great things, you've now been cut out, and you in some way have to compromise either on the way you operate, the nature of your content, or the relationship you have with your users. The point of cryptocurrencies and this whole decentralized infrastructure notion is to say that you don't have to make those compromises for the sake of MasterCard or Visa or for PayPal, or you don't have to make those compromises for content providers like YouTube or what have you, or Twitter. You can just dream up your experiences, write them as they are, and then integrate these platforms, this decentralized infrastructure, which is censorship resistant, and it doesn't live with a curator. So that's one dimension of it. The other dimension is there are certain things with your experiences which are trusted. So gambling is the canonical example, but basically you can look at pretty much anything where you, the server, say, trust me. And the hope is with smart contracts, and the hope is with decentralized infrastructure, is that in some way you can take it from a centralized point, you can take it from a trust us, trust the server, and break it down and say that there's a different trust model behind that. Whether you're storing information, you're doing computation, you're talking about a financial transaction where two people are coming together, you don't need that middleman of necessity anymore. You can cut it out. Now, for this to work well for the web developer, it means that you need to be able to continue using your experiences and tooling that you're used to. HTML5 and CSS, and pick your latest JS framework, whether that be Angular or React or whatever the hell you guys like using these days. You should still be able to use that. And then you need to have some sort of an interface. So instead of talking to a server, you can talk to a blockchain. Or you've already seen some great progress, like with MetaMask and these other ideas about how to do that. And there's already starting to emerge a whole development experience with this whole notion of Web3, where you can take that notion of a decentralized infrastructure and connect it to your web application. Now, what's really important to me is to avoid vendor lock-in. What I don't want to happen is to say that once you've committed and you've deployed on a particular piece of infrastructure, whether that be Ethereum or Cardano or EOS, whatever that might be, that you're locked in and you're trapped there and you're stuck with a particular token, and that's that. And you can't mitigate or migrate. You just live there. So it's really important that you be able to switch between these platforms. Second, it's important that you get to use the tools that you want to use, and that the smart contract layer of the system is not there for the sake of being there, but it's there to add another dimension to your application that allows you to continue offering the services the way you want, or to reduce the trust model behind those services. So in essence, it's just one of those things where you say, I have a problem I want to solve, I have a customer I want to serve, and there's some component of that problem customer fit that does require decentralized infrastructure, or would be made better with decentralized infrastructure. Now, guess what? There's millions of things in the world where this doesn't fit. Doesn't make any sense. If you're doing an MMORPG, does it really make sense to have that be completely decentralized? Maybe not. If you're doing your work server and you're allowing your employees from home to dial into that, it's probably counterproductive to attempt to decentralize that, because at the end of the day, it's your company. Especially you're talking about your company's payroll or something like that. That said, there are certainly a lot of technology that we build that could be useful, like MPCs, threshold signatures, next generation signature stuff, and encryption to be quantum resistant or better than the PGP standard. Great. but doesn't necessarily require blockchain or any of these types of things. But if your goal is to talk about federating trust, if your goal is to talk about censorship resistance, if your goal is to talk about alternative payment channels, or complex financial contracts that you want to be settling without a counterparty or a trusted third party, if that's the case, then it makes a lot more sense to go with the cryptocurrency side of things. Okay, what do we got here? Are BTC ADA atomic swaps on the horizon? It'd be really cool to do that. It'd be really cool actually to do some sort of DEX where we have atomic swap support for a long list of cryptocurrencies. We've had some discussions about, after Shelley, what do we do? Well, the great part about Shelley is we're going to have all this wonderful infrastructure, a great network protocol. It'll be quite easy for us to layer more functionality on top of that. We'll also have this notion of stake pools, and they're going to be quite robust, and a lot of them will deploy relays in addition to just doing staking services. And there's a strong potential we could layer on top of that a payment channel system and layer on top of that an Oracle system and federate these things. So that's going to be a high priority for 2019, especially as we pull Plutus into the base ledger. Once that's there, it'd make a lot of sense to go and try to push a DEX into the system, because people are going to be able to issue their own assets. We'll have sidechain support, and we'll have smart contract support via Plutus and Marlowe at the base layer. So it would be very easy for us to put some sort of decentralized exchange on, or at the very least try to do atomic cross-chain swaps. So there already are some great protocols on market. There already are some great projects. So it's not a matter of innovation there. It's just a matter of who's the market leader and what tech looks best, and then trying to adopt something there. And if you do need some sort of curated middleman to do that, we could write a protocol into Cardano to make that happen. So the short answer is we're looking into it. Long answer is that it is something that would be probably after we get payment channels and oracles into the stake pools. Mm-hmm. Let's see what else we got here. Does the Microsoft protocol being released worry you, and what effect will it have on Cardano? Can you partner with them? I generally don't worry about big companies releasing cryptocurrency protocols. What we found talking to IBM, Microsoft, Google, and many others is they have very little interest on the cryptocurrency side of things, and they do have some interest on the blockchain side of things. And generally how that interest works is either they just join an alliance like Hyperledger, or they have an internal team at their company that does a skunkworks. It builds some sort of cryptocurrency solution. Then they write some white papers, they go take them to the right conferences, and they go, huzzah, look at all the great stuff we have. And maybe they even build a patent portfolio around that. But at the end of the day, what are they really doing? They already have an existing enterprise business line. And what happens is they sell to Fortune 500 companies, and some CEO of a Fortune 500 company will call up the salesman, or maybe their CTO or a mid-level executive, and say, hey, I need blockchain. There's a mandate from God. It's coming from the board. Blockchain's hot and sexy. We need that. And what IBM or Microsoft will do is say, well, we have that. You're buying one of our products. We'll just layer it on top of that, and we'll give you blockchain. And they're like, great, we have blockchain now. And then they call their boss and say, boss, we're state of the art. We have blockchain, whatever that means. That's what we found in our conversations with them. It's not to say they're not solving real problems. In fact, I'm a big admirer of what's been done with Fabric. I think it's a great piece of technology. Really like the team. I think the way that Christian approached pushing everything out was quite pragmatic. They built a product in Go. They wrote a white paper. They reformed the product, and then they built a great steering committee. And there's just a lot of good people that are making contributions there. And overall, it's a decent approach with great documentation, and there's even some good books that are floating around on how to use it. But long and short is that my belief is that the people who will benefit the most from blockchain are in the enterprise setting are going to come from places that are paper-based, and they're throwing that out, and they're going to a completely new system. When you have legacy systems, which are quite sophisticated and already digitized, and there's billions of dollars of investment in those systems, the steering cost to go and adopt a new system is just too much. But if you're talking about like coffee farmers in Africa, where they're completely analog, they're completely offline, and you're saying, well, how do we move these people online? It would be very easy to envision how you can build a blockchain layer and then create digital identities and pull them there. And then you can talk about interoperability of that enterprise system with Cardano, for example. And same things that allow you to store money on these types of things could also allow you to store identity on these types of things. And it wouldn't cost much more to make it a really cool ID card. So I don't worry so much about them. We can partner with them where possible. And if they're open source, great. No plans to use Elixir at the moment, although I'm a big fan of the language. I don't worry about Ethereum's proof of stake at all. So the question is, what do you think about Ethereum running proof of stake? If they ever get there, great, welcome to the party. I feel we are ahead of them in terms of research and in terms of engineering and in terms of clarity on how we're going to roll it out and what we're going to do. They worry about fundamentally different problems than we worry about. They're just obsessed with finality. It's pretty easy to achieve that, either on the probabilistic side or on using a BFT protocol. You can get it instantly. They're super worried about long-range attacks. We solved that with KES and the Genesis assumption. So I think they overthink certain things and they underthink other things. And to be honest, their research agendas never really made a lot of sense to me. So I don't worry too much about them. And even if they achieve it, the best they're going to do is just have a protocol that competes with Cardano. Great. We already have a POS, and we have a wonderful vision on how we're going to accomplish sharding. We have a paper coming out soon called Parallel Chains. That with the sidechains research, it'll converge to Warpwar's Hydra. And we have this beautiful foundation for how we're going to move our way into a sharded ecosystem. And frankly, if you wanted to shard with the approach that Ethereum is using, it would make a lot more sense if they just did a stake-based election system with like an NPC generating random numbers and elect 250 delegates and have them run something like Rapid Chain. Close each epoch with a checkpoint. But okay. All right. Let's see here. What else we got here? Are you taking care of your health when you travel? No, and everybody complains about that, although I am losing weight. It's going to be a big 2019 thing. Get Charles healthy. I can have a prediction contract about my weight. Quantum computing and Cardano's quantum resistance. So there is a good indication that governments are worried about quantum computers when you see NIST get together and say, hey, we're going to have a competition to replace all our old crypto with quantum resistant crypto. U.S. government standardizing protocols for quantum resistance. It means that there's a strong belief within the U.S. government that within 10 to 20 years, we will see quantum computers emerge to a point where they can compromise existing cryptography. You kind of have to get a transition quickly because what happens is when you transmit something, a foreign government will archive that. China will store it, Russia will store it, and we store their communications. And we just say, hey, in 10, 20 years, when we can decrypt these things, we'll know what you guys were talking about in 2018. So huzzah. Anyway, so they're standardizing things now in anticipation that within a few decades, these things will materialize. It's really expensive to build quantum computers, and it's not clear exactly how to do it. Although a lot of people have great ideas, and they've built some great proofs of concepts, and there's even a company called D-Wave, which sells them and even sells cloud time for quantum computers. And then there's discussions about using things called time crystals for memory. It's pretty crazy how deep these things get. But overall, I don't worry too much about it. But it turns out that some of the signature schemes that are quantum resistant also have forward security. So if you need a KES, it's really good to just go in that direction. So we're looking at the moment into a variant of XMSS maybe we go in a different direction, but hash-based crypto is quite nice. If we have that, helps us with Genesis, it also helps us with quantum resistance, at the very least on the delegation and the ledger maintenance side. Now, it's probably too heavy to use for things like transactions, because right now the post-quantum signature schemes are about 50 to 100 times in practice heavier than the elliptic curve counterparts, depending upon the type of post-quantum you use. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to inflict that upon your users, but at some point in the future, it would make sense to include an option to use that type of a signature scheme, and people would pay a much higher transaction fee. So if they're particularly worried about it, or they're thinking about archival storage, then that's the direction to go. That said, if you're a cryptographer, a big amount of cryptographers are studying post-quantum cryptography, and they're developing all kinds of innovations and optimizations, and they're looking at new mathematical primitives that are potentially more efficient, kind of like when we went from RSA to elliptic curve crypto. You gained a huge amount of efficiency from that. So my anticipation is within the next 5 to 10 years, we should see the next generation of these things come online. And based on what NIST is doing and what cryptographers are doing today, those schemes will be quite useful for the transaction stuff, the things you use it with HD wallets and the things you use on cards like this, which are very limited resource. But then for delegation and for the ledger maintenance, it does make sense, because that's much lower volume. You don't have a lot of signatures, just one per block, and then the delegation side of it is not much. It makes a lot more sense to move in that direction sooner. So we have a strategy. Over time, we'll gradually move that way. We also are kind of keen to understand what a quantum adversary looks like. So what does an adversary who has a quantum computer, what are all the things that person can do? It goes beyond just breaking signatures. And that's a really deep and interesting topic. And it's an understudied topic. So it's something we'll definitely do after we have our feet wet with just picking a signature scheme for Shelley. And then moving beyond that, we'll examine Ouroboros in that perspective. Okay. The shirt is from Hawaii. I used to live there. I lived on Maui in Makawa. Yes, I'm going to Crypto Crow's event in Ohio. I just can't remember when it is. Oh, everybody follows Sargon. Yes, people can massively generate addresses, but it really won't do anything. If you look at the mathematics of it, the key space is quite large. It's like saying, hey, I swapped a single grain of sand on the beach over in Hawaii, one of the Hawaiian islands, with a little itsy bitsy metal ball that's painted to look like sand. So why don't you go at random and start grabbing little grains of sand until you find that metal ball that's painted to look like sand. Good luck with that. And you can only pick it up one little grain at a time. Now imagine taking that and making it even larger, and that's basically the space that you're dealing with. No, I don't like coleslaw. And you guys are free to ask me about anything you want, not necessarily even Cardano related. Does Cardano and Sirin Labs have an agreement of some sort? That was a deal, my understanding, was negotiated by Emergo. And I did actually fly to Israel for Eurocrypt. And while I was there, I met with Moshe and had a discussion with them. And they got to show me around their facility. And didn't look too bad. It was a really nice place, beautiful skyscraper, lots of really pleasant people. And they were making good progress towards building the Finny. This was before their launch. I'm not sure if the phone is out or if there's still a few months behind that. But basically, it's a cell phone, and it has a trusted hardware module in the back that slides up, and then you can touch it and communicate with it and do cool things with it. And the trusted hardware module will support their embedded token as well as other cryptocurrencies. And I believe the deal that was negotiated with Emergo to Sirin was to have ADA support. They've been very friendly with me, and I haven't gotten any indication that they're not going to support ADA. But I'm not directly aware of when and how that support is coming. But I'd imagine that it's coming probably soon. Although I'd reach out to Emergo and into Sirin to get an exact date on that. So how did I get into cryptography? So I'm not a cryptographer. Cryptography is a really involved and deep topic, and it takes about 10 years, in my view, to make a good cryptographer. So I took at CU Boulder a course in cryptography from a professor there named Suyun Yi. And he's still teaching, nice guy, studied algebraic number theory. And we used Silverman's book, which is probably the worst of all books to study cryptography from. And I always felt it was really interesting. And then later on, I took the Coursera Dan Bonnet classes and John Katz's class. And I actually ended up reading John Katz's book, which is much, much better than Silverman's book. It's called Introduction to Modern Crypto. I read the first edition, but the second edition recently came out, and it's quite good. Anyway, the appreciation that you gain is you think about things like confidentiality, integrity, non-repudiation, and authentication. It's basically this notion of secure communication and this concept of knowledge. How do you know who somebody is, who they claim they are? How do they prove that to you? What different ways can they prove that to you? And if you have some piece of information, how do you obfuscate it so that the adversary can't know it, but then the desired recipient can? And in what scenarios can you share that? And other things too, like this concept of zero knowledge cryptography, where you kind of prove things without revealing it. Like, I want to sell you my password, I can prove I own it, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. So it's a super interesting field because it's a great intersection of psychology, sociology, mathematics, and computer science. And you're always thinking about capabilities. You're asking yourself, well, what can the adversary do? Can they do a plain text attack or a chosen ciphertext attack? Or, can the adversary, does he have access to my computer? Does he have access to the CPU itself? What level of insanity are we going to go? Am I so paranoid I'm going to go out to the beach with a cup and grab my own sand and make my own silicon? Cryptographers are trained to think in a way where they can kind of go from bedrock all the way up and model protocols accordingly. What's really elegant about the field is that it's a rigorous field. It's one where you have assumptions and models and you have proofs, and those proofs can be checked by third parties. In some cases, they can be mechanized. There's actually a cool platform called EasyCrypt made out of MDIA, and it allows you to mechanize the proofs, and computers can understand them and verify them. And occasionally, we can take the underlying math and write like an Isabelle or Coq proof for it. So if you're a mathematician, it's always appealing to say, hey, they're using mathematical primitives, whether they be things with lattices or they're things with assuming how hard it is to factor integers or the discrete logarithm problem. And we're able to construct trapdoors and construct hardness guarantees from it. Or I should say like hardness assumptions, because you can't actually prove these things are hard. So I was always interested tangentially. But it's really amazing to see what the professional cryptographers are able to do. It's just there's an elegance about that field, especially with the papers that I see our cryptographers writing. It's really admirable, where you can see the development of Ouroboros, where first it started from a very rigorous definition of what is a blockchain. It's a GKL model. And then from that, they say, oh, okay, by the way, we can create that secure ledger using this beautiful construction, and it's secure because we can prove these interesting things about this object called four-coupled strings. And then based on that, you can just keep going and going and going and talking about networks and all these other things. And you can even throw away the clock. We have this new thing called Ouroboros Chronos that allows you to abstract that out. So it's so incredible to watch that. It's a lot of fun to watch that. But it's not the end all be all. The heart of cryptocurrencies is, of course, cryptography, but it only works because you have secure implementations. It only works because you have a scripting language. It only works because you have a network. And guess what? Those are different fields of computer science. And if those things aren't well thought out, you can have perfect crypto and the system still would be junk. So it's cool to see all those pieces come together. But even if they all come together perfectly, if you don't have a good user experience, it doesn't matter. Nobody will actually do anything. There is no greater example of that than PGP. It's a shame that PGP didn't take off. I often say if it had, we'd have a password-free internet. And we'd have a totally different way of understanding who people are on the internet. You'd have a reality where when you go to log in, you just click a button. And so when you go to create an account, you register your PGP key, it sends you a challenge, you sign it, it goes to them, they look it up on the web of trust, and they say, oh, that's Charles Hoskinson, and it fills out the profile, and maybe you can even send them over a shared secret for a profile card that's encrypted, but when they pull it, they can decrypt it and fill in your login information. And then whenever you want to log in, it'll just go ahead and send you a challenge. You sign, and it can verify that you're the owner of private key. So it's a one-click login. So you could get rid of SSL certificates. You could get rid of passwords. You could get rid of usernames. You could have a very easy way of propagating user accounts. I mean, it's just a magical thing, and it's just a much easier management layer. And in addition to that, you have encrypted email. So you'd figure that given that there's this overwhelming advantage to the user and this overwhelming beautiful thing that you can do for users, that people have recognized that and adopted. But PGP was a commercial failure. An elegant, beautiful thing of cryptography, great for Phil Zimmerman and Finney and John Callis and the others who worked on that. And it's just super impressive to see how clear their thoughts were and what they were able to accomplish with it, but no one adopted it. So crypto alone is not the only end-all be-all. You really have to have great user experience with it. Why do you think the Chinese rate EOS higher than ADA? Don't you think they're trying to control the market? I think any government that thinks it's a good idea to put everybody in a database and assign social credit scores to them, and if you buy the wrong food at the supermarket or you associate with the wrong people, your score goes down and then you get fired from your job and your money gets shut off, probably doesn't have their priorities aligned with the priorities of cryptocurrencies. So I take it as a mark of pride that EOS is higher ranked than Cardano. I want to be at the very bottom of their scale. I don't want to be anywhere near the top. Is Plutus going to have dependent types like Idris, Agda, or Kak? That is a really good question. The closest I think we'll come to that is probably refinement types. If you're familiar with liquid Haskell, you should look that up, and those ought to be sufficient for most verification work that you want to do. We could do dependent types, but then it begs the question of, would it just simply make more sense to write a Idris to Plutus or compiler, and then you could just simply write things in Idris? And then you could reuse that ecosystem. But refinement types are certainly something we're interested in. IOHK is going to start investing money into liquid Haskell and making sure that that ecosystem becomes much more prevalent. We're also going to start investing money into GHC.js. So it would be nice to see liquid Plutus and bring that in. So that's something we'll definitely talk about at the summit. 31. No, Cardano's not going to fail. It's going to survive. Do I talk to Vitalik often? He occasionally wishes me happy birthday, and I see him at the conferences from time to time, and I say, hey, Vitalik, and he says, hey, Charles, and usually that's the extent of our communications, which is a shame. Let's see what else we got here. Hello, Malaysia. It's a lovely country. Food is wonderful. Why are there ERC20 tokens valued higher than Cardano? Is there one? What's an ERC20 that's higher than Cardano? I think everything above us is non-ERC20, unless, is Tether ERC20? I always forget these days. Yeah, maybe it is. That's Tether. What are 3 books you would recommend? Any field? What are you reading right now? Right now, I'm reading Grant's biography called Grant. It was written by Ron Chernow. Wonderful book. Ulysses S. Grant is just an incredible figure in U.S. history. He was born in 1822, died, I think, in the 1880s. And Grant was the guy that everybody just bet against. He had this domineering father named Jesse Grant, and he and his mother were kind of abolitionist or parents who were high energy, and his father was kind of like a jovial businessman along the lines of P.T. Barnum, and it was a tanner. And Grant was kind of quiet and reserved, and nobody really cared much about him or had high hopes for him. So his father didn't want to pay for his university, so he sent him off to West Point. He networked his way in to get a recommendation, and Grant went there. And he was a very unassuming person. He was 5'2" when he enrolled in West Point. He grew a whole 6 inches that year and ended up 5'8". And his only notable differentiator, I would say, is that he was a great horseman. So you figured that he'd become a cavalry officer, but instead they made him a quartermaster. Then he had to go and fight in the Mexican-American War, and it was rather unremarkable. Everybody was fawning over Robert E. Lee, but didn't care too much about him. And then he ended up marrying this gal named Julia, who her father was a Southern plantation owner in Missouri. And he was really racist and didn't like Grant at all and thought he was kind of a pushover. So Grant's father was an abolitionist and his father-in-law was a slaveholder. So he was caught in between 2 worlds, and he had this doting, wonderful wife who was a bit head in the clouds. She was a bit of an idealist and romanticized the South. So then Grant was transferred to a series of outposts from the backwater in New York to a outpost out in California, and he had a drinking problem. So he eventually, while out in the middle of nowhere, drank himself to a point where he got kicked out of the army. So he was a deposed captain, and he kept falling prey to get-rich-quick schemes, and people would borrow money and never pay him back. So he ended up being unemployed and destitute with no savings. He went back to his wife, and he tried to get a job with his dad, really couldn't get anything there. So he ended up getting a little lot of land from his slave-owning father-in-law, and he built a log cabin with his own 2 hands called Hardscrabble. And he lived on this farm and tried to be a farmer for 4 years and wasn't very successful at it. And then at some point, his father broke down and gave him a clerk job at one of his tanneries for $800 a year. And nobody really thought he was a good guy. Then suddenly the Civil War broke out, and in the short order, he managed to get a commission as a colonel, from a captain to a colonel, and fought in the Western Front and had a series of just stunning victories from Fort Donelson to Vicksburg, and eventually worked his way up to Major General. And then they decided to make him commander of the Eastern Front, and promoted him to Lieutenant General, first person in U.S. history since Washington to hold that rank. He crushed the Confederacy and became general of the army, and in short order became the president of the United States. So in just a period of a few years, he went from destitute, kicked out of the military for drinking, nobody that everybody just bet against, to a man who commanded 1 million people and a man who ran the United States for 8 years. But in true Grant fashion, after he left the White House, he ended up getting swindled by another person who was running a kind of a Bernie Madoff-style 19th century Ponzi scheme, and he lost all of his money again, and he was diagnosed with cancer. He had mouth cancer because he smoked 20 cigars a day. And then he's like, oh God, what am I going to do? I can't leave my family to be destitute. So he decided to write his memoirs, and he worked diligently, dying of cancer, and he barely got them done. I think he died about a week after he finished them, and they became a bestseller, and I think are one of the best-selling presidential memoirs of all time. what was really interesting is that he never even mentioned his presidency in his memoirs. He just covered his entire Civil War period and early history. And so he was able to provide for his family there. But really stunning guy and amazing person. And was a pivotal figure in the reconstruction of the United States, destroyed the Ku Klux Klan, the first instantiation of it. He was a huge proponent of abolition and helping out the slaves. And I think a very underrated president. He was also one who was constantly taken advantage of by others. And there's just so many examples throughout his life where he just got screwed over and over and over again, from his presidency to his generalship to his own father. And just a great case study in how bad people can be to another person. So definitely reading that book. It's a big one. It's about 800 pages, I think. And anything Ron Chernow does is quite thick. And in fact, other books I'd recommend, one of them is from, well, his name will come to me in a bit. It's called Moonwalking with Einstein. And it's a book on memory. It's kind of ironic. I forgot the name. Josh Foer is the name. So highly recommend that. Good book on how this journalist decided to study how people had a good memory. And he learned all the memory tricks, and he entered a memory championship and actually won the championship. And what else would I recommend? Let's see. What have I read recently? I'm also reading Jordan Peterson's book on 12 Rules, and that's always a fun book to read. I like him. Okay, let's see here. The name was Moonwalking with Einstein. Have I tried any other alternative approaches to mental health and well-being? I think a lot of mental health issues stem from lifestyle and stem from a lack of purpose. There's certainly genetic and physical issues that people have. Depression is genetic, as is bipolar disorder and so forth. But the problem with society and life is that we used to grow up with clear, defined rites of passage. You're 18, you graduate from high school, you get the job, get the wife, you have the kids, you move on. You have these phases of life you go through, and you have these rituals you go through as you go through those phases of life. And we kind of lived in these siloed worlds where information was kind of controlled and doled out, and our perception of reality was mostly laden with tons of social fictions, and it was hard to deconstruct them unless you became learned. And the more learned you become, then usually the more depressed people became. Then suddenly the internet comes around, and society changes, and those barriers blur, and people don't graduate at 18 and move out of their parents' home. They live till they're 30, and they don't have kids, or if they do, they are single parents, and society's just gotten weird. And it's really hard for people to find meaning and purpose. And it's really hard for people to, when they know that a lot of the things that they used to do were rituals and fictions, to say, okay, from that, where do we go? Viktor Frankl actually wrote a book about this called Man's Search for Meaning, not specifically about our current modern society, but about the human desire to understand their purpose and place in society. The Albert Camus also wrote about this. He had all these things that he wrote about Sisyphus. Sisyphus is the classic Greek story of hell, where a person screws with the gods, and so they screw him back, and they imprison him in this endless cycle where he has to push a boulder up a hill. And when he gets the boulder to the top, it rolls all the way back down, and he has to go back to the base of the hill and roll the boulder back up, and he does this ad infinitum. So the Greek notion is that this is hell because you never accomplish anything, you never get anywhere. But actually, Camus has the exact opposite opinion. He says that Sisyphus is in bliss because he now can focus solely on the act instead of the outcome. Every moment he can figure out a slightly better way of pushing the rock. Every moment he can find a slightly better way of putting his feet on the ground to get the rock up the hill just a little faster. And there is no point to it. It's almost like a video game. You play over and over again. You can't, let's say Minecraft, you can't really win, but it's the act of doing it and doing it a little bit better each time. The Japanese also have a term for this. It's called ikigai, the way of life or the act of life. The sushi chef who makes the same piece of sushi for 60 years but tries to make it slightly better. So I think there's a lot of that in society where people don't have meaning or purpose and they don't value the things that they do, and so they get a little hopeless. I think there's also social media is creating a situation where people have a fundamental lack of empathy for each other. There is no understanding anymore of what is the other person's position and why do they believe what they believe. If a person's criticizing me, maybe they're criticizing me because they have a financial incentive, or maybe they're criticizing me because they heard just one thing from one person, and that's their only view of who I am, and they've created a two-dimensional character that they want to attack. So when you look at those things or you think about those things, you say, oh, okay, well, if that's their only frame of reference, I can understand why they're saying that. It's not personal. They're attacking a person who doesn't exist. So I think there's quite a bit of that too. And unfortunately, social media has compressed many people to become two-dimensional and has created a society where people aren't rewarded for deep understanding of each other. And in some cases, people are punished for trying to deeply understand each other. You see this a lot, especially in college campuses, where if you don't have the right political beliefs, those beliefs will be harshly punished and you can't even engage in dialogue. They won't even let you speak. It's not even about what you're saying or why you're saying it. It's you're not in our camp. And so as a consequence, you're the enemy and must be destroyed. So I can imagine that certainly has a great impact as well. But there is good news in that there are better mental models, better social fictions that are being invented, and there are better therapies and techniques that seem to be percolating, especially with mindfulness and especially with physical health, which I think will probably help people out a lot. And instead of these being secrets that are guarded by a collective few, these are things that are percolating throughout the world at the speed of the internet, especially through the intellectual dark web. I mean, all you have to do is listen to Tim Ferriss or Joe Rogan or any of these other guys and gals, and you'll have a wealth of information about various topics from people like Paul Stamets, who talk about what mushrooms can do for us and all sorts of ways, like lion's mane can regenerate nerves and cool things like that. Michael Pollan has also wrote a wonderful book, How to Change Your Mind. And then you meet people like Wim Hof, who can teach you how to basically survive in the cold, go climb Mount Everest without a shirt on. It's pretty crazy to see these things that you hear about, but you'd think, oh, no, those are just superhuman genetic anomalies or those are made up stories, but you can actually verify them now and say that not only are they true, we can achieve these things as well. But at the end of the day, whether you do these things or not, there's still a notion of purpose and meaning. You have to find meaning in life. For myself, I wanted to do three things. I said, I'd like to do something in the world financial system. I'd like to do something meaningful in mathematics, and I'd like to do something meaningful in medicine. I come from a long line of doctors, and I studied mathematics, and I'd love to contribute there, especially with homotopy type theory. And I'm in the cryptocurrency space on the forefront of the financial renaissance. So if I can get to all three of those things and do compelling things in all three of those fields, I think that would be a life well spent. And I think most people are best served if they can kind of self-offer and decide where they want to go. And if they can't do that, then I can understand why they are sad or not feeling so well. Now, Ron Paul's a bit too old for 2020, guys. I wish he was still 50. I'd vote for him. His son is great, though. Rand will run. Yes, I have tried flotation tank therapy, and it's a great, great thing. Gonna buy one of them one of these days. Favorite mathematical constant? That's E. East Side, West Side. I was a West Side guy. Come on, Tupac. So while I have you guys here, actually, I was thinking about a crazy idea, and this is the first time I've ever shared it. It would be cool to build a cryptocurrency like this. So, and this is a completely new, off-the-wall cryptocurrency idea, and maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't do it. Maybe I'll just write a paper and pull an Elon Musk, like with the 1,000 mile per hour transportation system that he has. But anyway, the concept here is to take Hancheng's proof of human. So basically, this concept that you can do something to prove that you're a human being. And what Hancheng did is he created a consensus algorithm. And I'll post a link to the paper in the description of this. And you take a trusted hardware module, really cool trusted hardware module. And what you do is that has a namespace associated with it. And you use this proof of human to register the trusted hardware module for some period of time, let's say like an hour or something like that. Okay, then you connect that trusted hardware module to an EEG, let's say a Muse, so a headset that can read your brainwaves. So then what you can do is create a function that can basically act as a dampener, and you have that trusted hardware module registered to mine for some period of time, let's say like an hour. And basically, if you're calm, then it mines at the maximum rate. And if you're distracted, it mines at the minimum rate. And there's a kind of a wave there, so it'll oscillate on your rate. So if you put these two things together, a piece of trusted hardware, a proof of human algorithm, and you have some sort of function that can actually identify that it's an EEG and act as a dampener, you put them all together, you could actually create a cryptocurrency where you can mine by meditation. Think about that. Wouldn't that just be crazy? So maybe that's the Hyperloop. But I got to call Hancheng and ask him about this because he wrote the paper to prove that you're human. And I think you can register a TPM. And then it's just a matter of figuring out, well, how can you distinguish between random stochasticism and actual meditation, and then connect it to a device. And I think the Muse has an SDK. So you probably could put all these things together and have a mind meditation cryptocurrency. But that would be super cool to do post Cardano, once we're past Shelley. So one of these days I'd have fun with that. And then it brings a whole new meaning to these Chinese mining farms, because instead of having computers, you just have thousands of Chinese guys with meditation headsets sitting on a pillow for 8 hours or 10 hours meditating. We'll call it tranquil. See if we have anything else here. Looking for one more. Aren't they getting rid of plasma? They're going to Starks. We didn't put $4 million into that, but I guess they did. Come on, guys, give me a good question. Was Haskell a good choice? Yeah, that's a great question. I ask myself that every day, So a programming language is just a tool, and it's a tool to solve whatever problems ail you. And selecting a good programming language is a surprisingly difficult thing, because it turns out that there's a lot of these tools. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of them. So you have kind of different paradigms. You can do logical programming or declarative programming. You can be like Prolog guy and live in that world. You could do imperative programming or object oriented and write something in C. C++, C Sharp, or Java, or you can be a functional guy. And then within there, you have flavors of it where you say, I'm functional, but I don't like committing. So you can do Scala or F Sharp or Clojure, or you can say, I'm functional and I really want to commit. So you can do a Camel or Haskell or something like that. Or you can say, I'm functional and I'm just batshit crazy, so I'm going to do Idris or Agda or Coq or something. So you have this spectrum of ideas or things that you can do. And really, when you say, all right, well, why are we going to do this? Well, it's this war between correctness and certainty and developer accessibility, maintenance, and speed of deployment. So if you want to do things as fast as possible and you don't give a shit about quality and you want as many people as possible to understand what you're doing, you pick something like PHP or Python or JavaScript. You can move super fast and you can write lots of things and everybody can look at those things and get it because there's a huge pool of developers that understand it. If you want to move really meticulously and slowly and methodically and write things in the most correct way you can, you could use formal methods and write specs, and then you can implement from the specs, improve by simulation, or do property-based testing from the specifications. And you will probably have a much smaller set of people that know what you're doing, but of the people who know what you're doing, you have much higher certainty that you're correct. So what do? Well, cryptocurrencies have money at stake. They have, and they're not big. If you actually look at these protocols, like we wrote for Ethereum Classic, and now it works with Ethereum, a client, a full node, and it's only 15,000 lines of code in Scala. So at the end of the day, these protocols that are in the cryptocurrency space, the infrastructure layers of the system, are not huge amounts of code. They range from about 10 to 100,000, maybe a little bit more, but not a lot more code. So you're not talking about a situation where you have to write millions of lines of code and swap it out a lot, and you're always doing rapid prototyping for things. You're talking about a situation where you have science giving you well-defined protocols to operate on and to execute on. So if you live in that type of a world, then, and given that you have money at stake, privacy at stake, that given that the people have to trust these systems to run correctly for decades, perhaps, it makes a lot of sense to err on the side of correctness than instead of on the side of developer accessibility. So that's one dimension of it. But then within that dimension, you have all kinds of compromises you can make. There's a very strong argument to write these protocols in things like PureScript or ReasonML, for example, where you get all that functional magic and goodness, but then your JavaScript actually underneath all of it. There's a very strong argument to make that you could write these protocols in something like Scala, and we've even done that. We chose Cardano to have Haskell because we wanted to bring together some of the brightest people in the world to do original research and to think about the problems of the cryptocurrency space. So it wasn't just about what is the ideal language and is this the fastest language to develop in, or is this the best cost benefit, or are we going to have the easiest time with tooling? It was more about saying, if I wanted to make this interesting to Duncan Coutts or to Phil Wadler or to Michael Peyton Jones or to John Hughes, what could I do to make it interesting to them? What could I do to come to them and say, there are 10 years worth of problems we've put up in a pile, and we'd like for you guys to come and solve those particular problems in a way that they've never been solved before, or in the most optimal way that we can prove. And Haskell gave us that path. It gave us the invitation to go and have these conversations and bring these people together. And what we were able to do with those conversations is inspire dozens of people to do some of the best work of their careers. Now, it hasn't been easy. It's been very tough. And we've made certainly a lot of missteps here and there. Some of the developers who worked on the project, especially with the initial releases, were a bit too junior. And some of the developers who were working on the project were a bit too principled in the things that they wanted to do. And they're optimistic about how quickly things could be done. So injecting pragmatism when you're in the ivory tower and you have deeply smart and principled people, oftentimes smarter than you, has been very tough. And we've had to figure out how we're going to gradually loosen things up so that we can get a production system and a delivery culture. And that's been quite hard. But at the end of the day, I think it has been very rewarding because what we've managed to accomplish is show that you can take this deeply arcane culture, this deeply arcane language that mostly academics care about, and of the people who do write it, maybe they write it for very bespoke, interesting things, but not mainstream things. and say that, yes, you can take these protocols and implement them in this language. And we're really starting to see an output from that process. We're really starting to see great work come out of that process. And 2019, I think, is going to be the year where it really starts shining. And then suddenly you have a situation where you have 20, 30,000 lines of code and almost no bugs. And it's highly maintainable and very modular and very library-like. And it's really easy to adapt and upgrade. And it has all these great guarantees about it and this beautiful test harness that you just never see in a JavaScript code base. Furthermore, it'll inspire many, many, many more people, especially really bright people who know what the hell they're doing, to come in and take this stuff seriously and do interesting work themselves. It's not about the ICOs, it's not about the money, it's not about the token value. It's more about the elegance of what we're doing. You know, if you want to do great things, you have to attract great people. And if you want to attract great people, you don't attract them with pedestrian ideas or pedestrian challenges. You don't go and say, build me a laptop this thick. You go and say, build me a laptop that thick. That's much, much harder, especially if you want the same functionality here as you have there. Similarly, you don't go to them and say, hey, I know you have a PhD in this topic and you're a world expert, but can you go write it in JavaScript or Java? Because that's the accessible language. And I want to attract some person that took a Code Academy class to read my code. These are protocols that are written by domain experts, and they're very complicated, and they're backed by very complicated cryptography. Why in God's name would you want a junior or a sophomore or a freshman, or in some cases, someone with no professional training, to be able to contribute to that code base and screw things up? If they write the wrong code, you lose all your money. It's like saying, well, I want surgery to be more accessible. I'd like everybody to be able to come in and take my liver out or take my gallbladder out or my kidney out. We as a society expect that certain tasks, whether that be the legal profession or that be medical profession or that be doing your taxes, do require domain training. So isn't it reasonable to say that the underlying protocols that hold up all of my wealth, my identity, my privacy, my property, those things should be built by domain experts who are the best in the world? And why don't we build an ecosystem that's a bright burning light for those people to attract those people to come and build those types of things, so that you can have a replenishing supply or inspiration and it continues to evolve in capabilities? Because if we don't have that, well, then what you end up getting is mediocrity. And you end up getting is stuff that really doesn't work the way you thought it was going to work, and a lot of promises that it will one day work until it doesn't. And then you lose all your money. So in a sense, Haskell's been very painful, but I think it was a necessary pain. And it's one that I would do over again. Yeah, we'd do a few things differently here and there. We would have retained different types of people in the beginning. And of course, we have a huge amount of hindsight that we've gained. But I don't regret the overall choice. Anyway, thank you guys so much for your time. This was a heck of a lot of fun. Only an hour and a half this time. And I look forward to you guys having the next AMA with me soon. Cheers.